Ready for some fresh new videos? Breaking Barriers is up next, and Megan will be breaking it down for you.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm here to take you through 4 videos about people who fought injustice and won. First up is the amazing story of the Freedom Riders, who were major heroes of the Civil Rights Movement. They were willing to risk everything so that all Americans, black and white, could travel around the country without discrimination. How did their actions change the way we live today? Watch the video and see.
Freedom Riders.
We're rolling along the highway.
In the 1950s, more and more Americans were enjoying the adventure of travel on the open road. But not everyone was welcome on the trip. In the South, blacks could not sit with whites on interstate buses and were forced to use segregated facilities in bus stations. Diane Nash was a teenager then and remembers what it was like.
The very fact that there were separate facilities was to say to black people and white people that blacks were so subhuman that we could not even use public facilities that white people used.
In 1961, Diane was one of a brave young group of students who decided it was time to challenge the segregation laws by breaking them. In May of that year, small groups of black and white students boarded buses together in Washington, D.C. and headed down south to test the segregation laws. They called themselves the Freedom Riders.
There is a possibility that we will not be served at some stops. There is a possibility that we might be arrested.
The Freedom Riders were prepared for trouble and had even trained for it. But they could never have imagined the level of violence they would confront when the first bus crossed into the state of Alabama. An angry mob surrounded them and set fire to the bus, then beat the passengers as they tried to escape the flames. The Freedom Riders practiced nonviolent resistance and refused to hit back. In Birmingham and Montgomery, even bigger mobs awaited other buses, and the riders barely escaped with their lives. But they didn't back down.
We'll take hitting, we'll take beating. We're willing to accept death.
They pushed on to Mississippi, where they were arrested and sent to prison. But even prison bars couldn't hold the movement back.
It was critical that the Freedom Ride not stop and that it be continued immediately.
For every group that was arrested, fresh troops came to take their place. A plan that had started with a few dozen students grew into a national movement, with hundreds of young people joining the cause.
Nobody asked me, but you knew you were supposed to be there. I got up one morning and I said to my folks at home, I won't be back today because I'm a Freedom Rider.
Eventually, the government in Washington sent in federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders. And just a few months after they began their journeys, the segregation laws were changed. Thanks to the courage and perseverance of the Freedom Riders, the signs came down, the bus stations opened their doors, and all Americans were welcome to ride.
Being behind bars is no joke. In our next video, you'll meet someone who was forced to do the time when he didn't even commit the crime. In an instant, Mario Rocha went from being a regular teenager to being a prison inmate, and the odds that he would ever be free again were slim at best. Here's something to think about. How can one person fight an injustice when they barely have a voice? Watch the video and find out.
Writing for his life.
Mario Rocha was just an ordinary teenager growing up in Los Angeles when his life was turned upside down. In 1996, he was at a party in East LA when shots rang out and a high school student was killed. Days later, a witness picked out Mario's face from a sheet of photos, and he was falsely accused of the crime.
I was innocent, so in my eyes, there's no way they could find me guilty.
But they did. At 18, Mario was convicted of murder and facing 2 life sentences in prison. He was living a nightmare.
You want to cry every night, you know, deep inside. You want to hit the wall and break the window because that's how valuable freedom is.
Mario struggled to keep his mind occupied as the long weeks in prison turned into months and then years. He started keeping a journal and discovered he had a talent for writing. He wrote about everything he knew: his family, his feelings, his frustrations.
I gaze through barred and graffiti-scarred windows at the beauty that I may never again behold. I want somebody, anybody, everybody to see me, to hear me.
Mario was heard by Sister Janet Harris, who ran a prison writing program. She believed in Mario's innocence and inspired others to fight for his release, including a team of lawyers who took his case for free. They knew that Mario had not received a fair trial, so they went to work re-examining the evidence, revisiting the scene of the crime, talking to new witnesses, and appealing the conviction. Years and years of trying to prove Mario's innocence took a toll on his family and friends.
There's the fear of Mario and of us too, of going to court and coming home saying, oh, we have to wait another year.
But Mario's spirit was unbreakable. He even faced violence from other inmates, surviving 2 brutal stabbings. Yet he continued to channel his energy into writing. His poems and plays were read by a growing audience, including other young people serving time in prison.
Beyond the Darkness by Mario Rocha.
I'll never take my freedom for granted. I'm gonna live these dreams. Someday, I'm gonna live these dreams.
Someday finally came for Mario when a judge agreed to hear his appeal. The court decided that Mario's lawyer had mishandled his trial, and after 10 long years, his conviction was overturned. It had taken a team to break down his prison walls, but it was Mario who had the courage and strength to walk out of his prison unbroken.
Who's better at sports, men or women? Well, if you've ever seen Venus Williams smash a 125-mile-an-hour serve, you know that women can bring it just as big as men. But way before there was a Venus or a Serena, there was a Billie Jean. In the 1970s, Billie Jean King helped transform people's attitudes about female athletes, and it changed the sports world forever. Why was it so important to Billie Jean to level the playing field? Let's see.
She's got game.
Equal pay for equal work. When do we want it now?
In the 1970s, women were on the march for equality with men, including equal pay and equal treatment under the law. Thousands of women were taking their case to the politicians in Washington, and one woman was taking it to the courts, the tennis courts. Billie Jean King was one of the greatest tennis players of her generation, but she grew up in the 1950s, a time when girls didn't dream about being pro athletes. Even at age 12, Billie knew she wanted to change that. But first she decided she'd have to be #1 in the sport. As a teenager in California, she was driven to be the best, racking up one tournament trophy after another. Her dream was to compete at Wimbledon in England, the most famous tennis tournament in the world. At 17, that dream came true, and Billie Jean became the youngest doubles champion in Wimbledon history. At 22, she won the women's singles championship and was ranked #1 in the world. But something was still missing: a paycheck. In the tennis world, male players earned most of the prize money, and Billie Jean was unwilling to accept that women were second-class athletes. So she organized other female tennis players to start their own professional tour.
Unless we got together as a group, we weren't going to have any power or say as to what prize money was available for us.
The U.S. Tennis Association threatened to ban the players, but the tour took off. Women's tennis soared in popularity, and the prize money followed. Billie Jean King continued to fight for women's equality both on and off the court. She organized a women's tennis union, lobbied for equal prize money for men and women, and even testified before Congress to support a historic law called Title IX, giving girls and boys equal access to school programs, including sports.
As far as budgets, it's a 99-to-1 in favor of boys' programs in the school system.
In 1973, Billie Jean King won all 3 Wimbledon titles: singles, doubles, and mixed doubles. But her most famous match would come later that year.
Live from the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, the tennis battle of the sexes, Billie Jean King versus Bobby Riggs.
A former tennis champ named Bobby Riggs challenged Billie Jean to play him to prove that no woman athlete could ever beat a man. Riggs hammed it up for the cameras, turning the event into a media circus that attracted a record tennis audience of over 30,000 people, with millions more watching on TV. Billie Jean played along with the pre-game show, but on the court, she was all business, crushing Bobby Riggs in straight sets, 6-4, 6-3, 6-3. The press called it a victory for women, but Billie Jean King had already shown the world what a woman can do.
In our next video, you'll meet someone who proves that no matter what you're dealing with, attitude is everything. As a disabled teenager, Darius Weams has faced more physical obstacles than most people ever will, but he stays focused on the positive. Why is it important to keep on rolling no matter what the obstacles are? Check it out.
King of the Road.
At 15, Darius Weams faced a scary, uncertain future. His muscles were wasting away from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a genetic disease that kills thousands of young people, mainly boys, every year. His older brother had already died from the disease, and Darius knew his life would not be long. But Darius had a dream. He wanted MTV to pimp his ride. So, backed by a crew of 11 of his best friends and funded by donations, Darius took off on a summer road trip across the USA, starting from his hometown in Athens, Georgia, and heading west to MTV headquarters in Los Angeles, California. His goal was to get a customized wheelchair, but Darius had another goal too: to raise awareness about his disease and the obstacles faced by people with disabilities.
One young man is traveling the country, Darius Weams.
Darius Weams.
Darius Weams.
Darius Weams is telling the country about
muscular dystrophy.
So I'm not ashamed to be in a wheelchair. You gotta keep on going.
They got off to a great start, but the first pit stop stopped Darius in his tracks. How do you get a wheelchair from the parking lot to the restroom when you can't get it over the curb? Fortunately, there was a bathroom on board their RV. The memory of that first obstacle faded by the time they reached the Florida coast, where Darius saw the ocean for the first time in his life and felt the waves crashing over him. In New Orleans, Darius's first big city, there were no obstacles to good eating. But in St. Louis, Missouri, the famous Gateway Arch could only be enjoyed from below, because the elevator to the top wasn't wheelchair accessible. In Arizona, Darius saw the #1 place on his must-see list, the Grand Canyon.
Darius goes west! That's the biggest place I ever seen. Feeling like I'm the king of the world.
And what could possibly top being king of the world? Floating above it in a hot air balloon.
Darius, you are flying.
Oh, snap.
He rafted down the Colorado River, drove through a tornado, got close to some gators, don't forget Vegas, baby, or riding shotgun in a sports car. In the end, MTV wasn't able to customize Darius's wheelchair on their show that season. But that was okay, because Darius, a kid who had never left his hometown, had already inspired enough people for a lifetime.
This is to all the people in the wheelchair. You don't have to stay at home. You can get out and see the world.
When he got back to Georgia, there was one more surprise waiting for Darius.
Tell me what you think about this one right here, Darius.
A local customizer had created the wheelchair of his dreams, complete with flat-screen TV, gaming console, cell phone, stereo system, subwoofer, and spinners. From now on, Darius Weams will ride in style.
Guess what? You finished breaking barriers, and there were no barriers to your success. Good job.